called golf.
Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce a very talented person in our midst today, Lola Bryan.
Ladies and gentlemen, golf is a very popular sport. Unfortunately, it can be very dangerous. For example, did you realise that in Auckland, on any Saturday afternoon, a golfer is hit on the head with a golf ball every 18 minutes? It's giving him a terrible headache. But do you take my friend Ethne? Now, she's a terrific golfer. She's very keen. She came to see me the other day. I hadn't seen her for ages, but she walked in the house and she said to me, "You're getting fat. You need more exercise. You should take up a sport. I suggest golf." Well, I had to admit that her first remark rather struck home. But I wasn't too keen on the golf bit. I knew nothing at all about the game. I had no wish to learn. But Ethne is a very forceful person, and in a weak moment I promised to meet her at the golf club. Now, before she left me, Ethne said a very strange thing. She turned to me at the door and she said, "Oh, by the way, dear, all the members of the club are terribly top drawer, so you won't let me down, will you? I mean, you will dress properly." And off she went, leaving me with my mouth literally hanging open. So I thought, I'll show Ethne I know how to dress. So when it was time to go, I put on my new afternoon tea gown, the one with the pencil slim skirt. I wore my high heel sandals, my long white gloves, a beautiful picture hat. I even wore my pearls and my furs. I was the very picture of elegance. And off I went. When I got to the golf club, couldn't see Ethne anywhere. But a lady met me at the door and she said, "Oh, you must be Lola." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Oh, Ethne left a message, dear. She'll meet you at the first tee." And so I said, "Thank you," and sat down and waited. And I waited, and I waited. Nobody served any tea. And just as I was wondering what to do next, a little man who'd been sitting over in the corner got up, came over to me and said, "Excuse me, madam, would you like to play around with me?" Well, you may laugh, but I didn't. I hit him. Hard. And in among all this confusion, in walked Ethne. She was furious with me for keeping her waiting. Me keeping her waiting? I ask you, I've been there for hours. However, before I could say another word, she pushed this great big bag of sticks into my arms and told me to move on. Well, by the time we got to what Ethne called the first tee, I'd had all the exercise I wanted. I mean, have you ever been to the golf club? Have you ever seen it? Well, I suppose parts of it aren't so bad, but it wants levelling out. Some of those trees cut out, almost sand holes filled in. As it is, it's more like an obstacle course. I did try very tactfully to suggest a few changes, but Ethne actually seemed to like it the way it was. And so we started to play. Well, I hit the ball, eventually, and that's not easy, I might add. And it went right into one of those sand holes. And Ethne said she didn't see how I'd ever get it out. So I just walked in and picked it up. It wasn't difficult. That's the trouble with Ethne. She always has to do things the hard way. Off we went again. And suddenly, Ethne became very excited and said she was quite sure she was going to get a birdie with her next shot. Well, I couldn't let that pass now, could I? I mean, one has to stand by one's principles, hasn't one? And I told Ethne in no uncertain terms I did not agree with killing wildlife, and furthermore she was not going to kill any birdies while I was around. And to make quite sure she didn't, I picked up her ball and threw it into the trees. She was livid. I thought she was going to attack me with her stick. But then I think she must have realised how wrong she was, because she just sank to the ground and burst into tears. Of course I forgave her little lapse, and I told her so quite kindly, but it was a long time before I could get her moving again. However, once more we set off. And then from Way behind, a voice shouted something that sounded like 4, and a little ball came whizzing through the air and would have rolled right into a little hole if I hadn't stopped it just in time. I know the man was pleased. He was absolutely dancing with joy as I threw his ball back to him. I wanted to wait around and let them catch up and have a little chat. Ethne wouldn't hear of it. Do you know, she turned quite pale and she said to me, "Run as fast as you can." Well, we had to run because 2 chaps came racing over the hill, brandishing their sticks and yelling, "Come back here, you..." Well, I won't tell you what they were saying. They weren't using very polite language. And so we had to run. And all the time we were running, Ethne was saying, "You go that way and I'll go this way." But I could see she was in trouble. And so I stayed with her. And you know, all the time we were running, I was thinking to myself, Ethne's not as popular at this club as she thinks. I mean, I saw several people glaring in our direction, and I didn't know any of them. They must have been glaring at Ethne. And that was my day at the golf club. I decided then and there I was not going to join. No. I haven't even got the place finished yet. Believe it or not, incredible though it may seem, I think they're going to plant more trees. They've got all the positions staked out with little flags. Mind you, when they start planting those trees and they begin to grow, Ethne and all her golfing friends are going to have to take their sticks and their balls and find somewhere else to play.
There you go.
I want you to imagine me as I was as a teenager. Tall, slender, and with tawny shoulder-length hair. Well, try. Look, I'll help you. Hold your head back like this. Come on, come on, come on. And sort of half close your eyes and sort of squint at me through your lashes. And concentrate. Now, are you getting the picture? Splendid, then we can continue. At this tender age, I fell in love with Arnold. And when he asked me for a date, I was thrilled. "Pick you up at 6, he called as he sped away on his roller skates. I spent the whole day getting ready. I washed and set my hair in little curls, manicured my nails, gave myself a face pack. Well, it was a mud pack, actually. Scared the dog half to death, but it was guaranteed to get rid of the wrinkles. But come to think of it, I didn't have many wrinkles when I was a teenager. And then, what to wear? I realised I'd forgotten to ask where we were going. But Arnold was tall, dark and handsome. And he put something on his hair that made it look like patent leather. He looked as if he'd be a marvellous dancer. Of course, I thought that's where we'd be going. He'd be taking me to the Winter Gardens or the Tower Ballroom and we'd be dancing the night away. I knew exactly what to wear. I put on my pink chiffon evening gown, the one with the sweetheart neckline and the puff sleeves, and the full skirt I could hold way above my head without disturbing the hem. Pink satin slippers completed my outfit. I even tucked a flower in my hair. I was ready at 5. Promptly at 6, Arnold rang the doorbell. I threw a silk scarf around my shoulders and ran to meet him. I didn't put the porch light on. I wanted to wait until we got to the ballroom and then sort of burst upon him in all my glory. His older brother was giving us a lift in the family car, and so off we went. We stopped and I got out and looked around. This wasn't the Winter Gardens. But it certainly wasn't the Tower Ballroom. We were standing outside the rugby park. "Come on," said my date. "Blackpool are playing Wigan. They've got the floodlights on. We'll be able to see a treat." Well, unless you have ever sat for 2 hours on a hard wooden bench on a cold winter's night, dressed in pink chiffon, you will never know the depth of my misery. All the way home, my date and his brother relived the game. Neither of them even noticed what I was wearing. They dropped me off at my house. By that time I was going off Arnold. My shoes were ruined. My dress would never be the same again. I spent the following week in bed with a heavy cold. Oh yes, I definitely went off armed. And then I met Gilbert. Oh, I really fell in love with Gilbert. And when he asked me for a date, I was over the moon. Once again, I forgot to ask where we were going. But Gilbert was the sporty type. He wore tweed jackets and plaid shirts and baggy slacks and never seemed to put anything on his curly blonde hair. I was pretty sure we'd be going to something sporty, and so I dragged out an old tweed skirt and piled on a couple of heavy sweaters, long woolen stockings, gum boots, and pulled a little woolly hat down over my ears, and I was ready. Gilbert rang the doorbell, and I ran to meet him. This time I put the porch light on. I said I was in love, I didn't say I was stupid. And there stood Gilbert in his plaid shirt, his tweed jacket and his baggy slacks. I breathed a sigh of relief as I hopped on the back of his motorbike and off we went. We stopped, and Gilbert escorted me up a flight of steps into a large foyer. I could hear music. I could see couples dancing through the wide double doors ahead. "Meet you back here in 10 minutes," said Gilbert as he disappeared with a suitcase into the gents. I stood rooted to the spot as all around me girls in pretty dresses flitted by and boys adjusted their ties and smoothed their hairs and followed. 10 minutes passed. Gilbert was back. But now he was wearing a dark suit, collar and tie. He even had his hair slicked down. He looked at me in amazement. "Haven't you changed yet?" he said. I looked back at Gilbert. I was rapidly going off Gilbert. I went off boys altogether for a while after that, until a friend of mine fixed me up with a blind date. We were to wear white carnations and meet at the foot of the escalator in the local emporium. It was all terribly romantic. And so there I stood at the foot of the moving staircase, watching this handsome boy glide down towards me. Down, down, down he came. My smile froze. He was 5'1", I was 5'8". I knew we'd never see eye to eye. At 20, I married John. John doesn't dance, so I don't own an evening gown. But whenever we go out, I always lay out all his clothes for him, right down to the correct handkerchief and the tie. The family say I spoil him, but I can't seem to get out of the habit.
Away you go.
So you want to buy a used car? I mean a used car. Not last year's model. What you want is an old, reliable car that's had one careful owner. Preferably a little old lady, right? Oh, you must forgive me, but it does rather take me back to my first old used car. My husband bought it for me for Mother's Day. He said it would be a reliable little runabout and save wear and tear on the family car. He had it done up for me and duly brought it home. And I must admit it looked marvellous with its new coat of paint and freshly laundered upholstery. I named it Gertie on the spot. I was thrilled. "Oh, darling, you shouldn't have," I said. Little did I realise how prophetic those words were. At first it was just little things like temperamental windows. Take the passenger window, for example. You could wind this down about so much, no further. Try and get a fraction more, and the whole thing disappeared with a rattle and a crash, leaving your poor passenger visibly shaken and apologising profusely. And then there were the doors. I mustn't forget about the doors. These were the kind of doors that didn't take kindly to being slammed shut. You slam one of these doors, you automatically made an enemy for life, as a rather large neighbour of mine found out one day to our mutual embarrassment. I had offered this nice lady a lift to the shops, and as she got into the passenger seat, she gave the door a hearty slam. My heart sank. I knew what was coming, and I was right. When we got to the shops, no amount of pushing or pulling from either side would induce that door to budge. It was well and truly stuck. Finally, the unfortunate woman had to climb over and get out the driver's side. I did mention, didn't I, that this was a lady of ample proportions, and getting her fat little legs over that middle bit was not a pretty sight. The car rocked and swayed as she struggled and wriggled. Her dress caught on, a crowd gathered to watch, and her dress caught on the gear lever, and she managed to extricate herself from the car with her skirts up around her waist and arms and legs every which way, to the cheers of the crowd and her utter mortification. No amount of coaxing would ever induce that poor woman to enter that car again, and I couldn't really blame her. After that I became a little more selective in my choice of passengers. They had to be small and nimble, just in case. I avoided traffic lights like the plague, because by this time the clutch had begun to play up, and to slow down for any reason at all was to invite a stall. I would have to haul on the hand brakes and stamp on the clutch and tickle up the accelerator, all the time sending clouds of black smoke out behind. One day, while I was hauling and clutching and waiting for the lights to change, I saw through my rear vision mirror a lady dressed in immaculate white weaving her way between the cars. I had to sit helplessly as she passed through my line of fire, dress changing colour as she walked. I shall never forget her anguished scream as she realised her lovely white dress now had a black border. All this hauling and clutching was not without its side effects. The strain on the back of the driver's seat was more than any metal could stand, and finally, with an almighty crack, it gave way, and I found myself flat on my back. It must have looked very odd from outside, a case of, now you see the driver, now you don't. Of course, I had the seat welded back into an upright position, and you would think, wouldn't you, that nothing else could go wrong. But I was to find to my cost that linings are not just something you put on the back of curtains. Brakes need them too. And I won't even go into the price of retread tyres. But enough to say that Gertie took on a very lopsided grin when the shock absorbers on one side gave way. This was the last straw. I decided that Gertie's tastes were becoming far too expensive for my pocket, and I decided we had come to the parting of the ways. But what could I do with a car like that? I couldn't, in all honesty, sell it as a going machine. And so finally I practically gave it away, stressing it was just for spare parts. And then, would you believe it? All those money-gobbling bits and pieces that I had poured into that car suddenly gelled, and she ran like a dream. I used to grind my teeth as she swept past me as I stood waiting for a bus. And I'll swear she grinned or winked a headlight. Still want to buy a used car? Well, Gertie's running around the town quite happily, but the chap who owns her reckons he wouldn't sell her for $1 million.